Unmooring of American Military Power aims to prompt and fuel discourse on our country's state of perpetual war. Now, judging by the spirit of banter in the audience, this new book has done just that. Ladies and gentlemen, please give it up for Rachel Maddow.
Before, let alone talk to this many people whose faces I could all see clearly. Because we're all in a well-lit room, it doesn't usually work like this. This is absolutely terrifying. I'm really, really happy to be here, and it's really nice of you all to be here. And you all have such nice phones. All right, so I read a book. It's called Drift. Quick poll, should I read something from it or should I just talk about it? Yay! Very good. I'll talk a little bit about it. I know that I'm going to take questions from you guys, so that'll probably be the most fun. So let me just give you a little premise about what the book is about, because most of you have only had it for about 14 minutes. I am 2 hours. Sorry. I'm just pretending this is normal. Obviously, I am not an expert on. I'm not an expert on war. I'm not an expert on the military. This is a book about politics, but it is about the politics of war. It's about how we make political decisions as a country about whether or not to go to war, and how we decide that it's even time to make that sort of a decision. When do we think that the use of military force is within our democratic control? And when do we think that that is something that's decided beyond us, or something that gets decided autonomously, or something that gets decided by people who don't answer to us as citizens? It's not an anti-war book. I think I'm mostly an anti-war person, but this is not about the individual merits of any particular war. It's about whether or not we made good decisions about how to get into war. It starts with Vietnam, because I think the consternation over Vietnam led to a real multi-front effort to try to make sure we didn't end up in a mess like that again. And so Congress passed a War Powers Act, which reasserted the constitutional prerogative of Congress to make a decision about war. Presidents couldn't just take us to war on their own say-so. Congress should be not just told about decisions about war, they should be asked, and it should be they who make the decision on it. The powers of the presidency, I think, were confronted but not changed by that newly muscular attitude from Congress. But I think, and this is something that I really, really enjoyed researching and writing about, maybe the most interesting change that Vietnam brought us, and the upset over Vietnam brought us, was something called the Abrams Doctrine. It was a restructuring of the military so we couldn't go to war in big ways without calling up the Guard and Reserves. It was really important to the politics of war because it ensured that war would mean the disruption of our civilian lives. It would keep the country focused on and feeling the sacrifice that any big war entailed, so it couldn't just be the military off alone. Ronald Reagan's presidency changed a lot of all that stuff. He started a war in Grenada with the Congress barely knowing about it. When Congress said no to what he wanted to do in Central America, he went around them to do it anyway, just flagrantly breaking the law. When he got caught for that, his administration, in trying to save his presidency, just invented, I think on the spot, ad hoc, a brand new, radically expanded doctrine of presidential power, which essentially said the president alone as one person can direct any war-related actions anywhere on Earth, even if it's directly in contradiction of a law that Congress passed. And that's a wacky idea. And it was a new idea. And it was a radical idea they cooked up to save Reagan's butt. And it became the basis of Dick Cheney's political life. Which wouldn't have been a big deal if Cheney had stayed sort of a backbench Wyoming congressman. But when Congress's previous muscularity on issues of war and not war started to go flabby over time, and Dick Cheney became White House Chief of Staff and Defense Secretary, when he was Defense Secretary, he came up with essentially a cure for the Abrams Doctrine. Instead of making sure that the manpower needs of the military would engage the whole country whenever we went to war, he restructured things so that the manpower needs of the military would, in part, be met very, very quietly as possible. They'd be met privately and for profit. In the Clinton administration, President Clinton and Vice President Gore were delighted to embrace and expand on that Cheney project. It frankly made it much easier for them when they needed to get around their own political constraints and use force in the Balkans. And so the Congress waxes and wanes in its interest in constraining and overseeing and directing matters of war, even though the Constitution puts them in charge of it. And the presidency's new powers essentially treat the US military as one man's personal army. And those powers grow and grow because no president likes to give up any power that any previous president has given them. And the military itself gets more and more hived off, cleaved away from civilian life. And the national security budget keeps growing and becoming more impenetrable. More and more gets declared secret. Politics get more and more muted around these issues. The wars get longer. And our sense that something's wrong with this picture gets deeper. In a non-partisan way, not even a liberal versus conservative way. I feel for the guy who was putting the magnetic yellow ribbon bumper sticker on his SUV as much as I feel for the person on their bike next to them in traffic cursing them for having a stupid yellow ribbon magnetic thing on their SUV because it's so impotent and because it's defeating the purpose. I feel for both of those things because I actually think they come from the same place. We barely noticed when the Iraq War ended as a country after 8.5 years and more than 4,000 Americans killed. St. Louis threw a parade, New York didn't. These are changes that I think have happened over a relatively short period of time. I don't think there was a conspiracy here. I think these were understandable decisions made by people looking at short-term political necessity, trying to get around short-term political barriers to what they wanted to do for the country. But I think each of them alone, and all of them collectively, just cut away at this mooring that we got from our Constitution to make us not too warlike as a country. Not a pacifist country, but not a country that's at war all the time either, like we are now. So again, this isn't about the merits of any one war. It is about the way we consider war and prepare for it and relate to it as a democracy. One of the fundamental ideas of America is that we get to decide our own fate, and that the military answers to civilians, and the civilians are elected by us. And so we get to decide what happens in our national security policy. And I'm sick of being lectured by people in the national security field who think they know better, who say, oh, we're not going to run this war by polls. Well, you're not going to run it by polls, but you better run it by elections, because that's how we express our will as a people. And so basically, it's a cocktail party book. It's about picking up chicks and getting drunk and living the high life. Anyway, I think that I did not want to write a book and then find a topic. I had this topic that I wanted to talk about, and I couldn't figure out a way to do it in the broadcast formats in which I have worked. This is not a between the commercial breaks sort of thing. This is a long form thing, and the only way that I could do it was in a book, in writing it, and it almost killed me to write it, but it came out the way I wanted it to come out. And I'm really, really grateful that you guys would come out to hear me talk about it and that you might read it. And I hope that we can have I hope that we can talk about this as a country in a way that is not about whether or not we're good people or bad people because of our opinion on this subject. I think this is something that cuts across a lot of lines. It isn't a thing that we need to fight over. I think it's a thing that we need to work on. And so I hope we can start talking about that. And now I will take your questions. Thank you very much.
Please raise your hands. Katie's going to take people up front, and then we're going to start there. I'm going to take the people right there in the second section. Katie, you go first.
Okay. Oh, I go? Okay. I don't really have a question as much as I have a thank you. My name is Maureen. I live in Pennsylvania. I'm running for the General Assembly out there.
Oh, thank you.
is one of the co-sponsors of the Just Close Your Eyes and Don't Look bill. And I would like to say thank you to you at MSNBC for all the coverage you did on it, because the bill is tabled as of right now. And hopefully I'll get elected and we'll overturn it and it will never become law in Pennsylvania. Thank you.
What's your name?
Maureen Madden.
Maureen Madden?
Yeah, running in the 176th district against a 10-year incumbent who was one of the original co-sponsors of this bill and has since taken his name off, because when he wrote the bill, he skipped over the sentence that said this is a transvaginal sonogram.
Wow. Well, I honor public service, including the decision to be a politician. It's a totally honorable line of work, and thank you for doing it. Thanks.
I read at the end of your prologue that you said this is fixable. Could you maybe let us know what steps we need to take? Maybe really short. Thank you.
You're like Newt Gingrich running for president. I'm not going to campaign. I'm just going to show up at the convention and collect my nomination. Just tell me the end. I'm also an impatient person. I think that some of it is hard. I think wielding in executive power is hard, in part because what happens when you expand executive power is that you give the executive the power to do more and more things over time. It's a tautology, right? That's what I'm explaining. But if what you need to do is rein in executive power, that's the one thing the really powerful executive is really not going to do, no matter how nice a guy. People don't give up power that they have been given, even if they don't believe that power is rightly given. It just doesn't work that way. It's like an aged rubber band that doesn't retract anymore. And all we're hoping for is that it snaps. Yeah, that metaphor, I'm sorry. So some of this stuff is hard, but some of this stuff is not that hard because it hasn't been this way for very long. For example, I don't think that we need to have a branch of the military that is secret, and that elected officials deny the actions of and refuse to explain and refuse to even be asked about in public in some cases. And we have that now effectively in the CIA. The CIA, I believe in there being a CIA. I believe in the necessity for a good spying agency as a country. And maybe you could convince me that it needs to have a small operational component, but we've expanded the small operational component of our spying agency into making them another branch of the military. The main difference between them and the rest of the military is that they are not explained, and we don't know what the chain of command is, and there's no accountability for what they do. We can change that. That's not a very old idea. We can also have the military peel its own potatoes. We didn't have Halliburton doing that for a while. Part of the reason that I think that is important, and again, I do not feel conspiratorial about this. I mean, we didn't end up with the Halliburton thing that became so famous after 9/11 because it was brand new at that point. We had really test run it in the Balkans and in other conflicts. The effect of it, whatever it was designed to do in the first place, the effect of it is that by having people working for private companies supplanting the number of people who would otherwise be deployed, who are members of the military, you occlude from view the cost of the services that they're providing, because they'll say it's going to be cheaper, but that's just an article of faith. It turns out not to be. How much it costs, you occlude from view accountability when they do something wrong. And we are also shielded from casualties. When private contractors get hurt or get killed, their companies are under no obligation to tell us who they are or that they were hurt or killed. And so all of those ways insulate us from what's going on. All of those things, that's what I think is important about the contractors. They insulate us from accountability and from what we're doing, and they're wicked expensive. So there's a little list at the end of the book. Those are a couple of things on it. I think it's changeable. I actually think it's changeable because, in part, these aren't partisan hot button issues. There's no constituency for these people aside from the people who are getting rich off of it, and even if that is intimidating, there aren't that many of them.
Rachel, big fan from California who arrived just in time to see you today. I've got a little bit broader question. You have a great deal of difficulty getting Republicans even to come on your show, and yet you treat them with civility. Those of us who try to talk to conservative friends and people we know, it's almost impossible, I find, to really engage them in any kind of depth like you do. Do you have any ideas as how we can start engaging other people in civil discourse?
It's a good question. sound so ridiculous that that's possible. Disability. First of all, one thing that I find helpful in terms of like sort of preventing my dander from going up in situations where I'm talking to somebody who's either being mean about it or with whom I really vehemently disagree, one thing that I remind myself is that most people do not give a rat's patoot about politics. And so, if I am talking with somebody who cares a lot about politics but has diametrically opposed views from me, I actually probably have more in common with that person than I do with somebody who doesn't care. And so there is a certain, I think there's a civic virtue in caring. And so the fact that you care, that's an asset. And that is something that we share, and let's start there. I think it also helps to understand a little bit about where people are coming from. I think it is rare that strong disagreements, especially on matters of national security, but on a lot of big policy issues, come from different impulses about what you want for the country. I think most people who care about politics and who have strong feelings about policy have those feelings because they want the country to be in a better place than it is. And you may think they're wrong, but respecting that impulse and where they come from, I think helps. So it helps not to yell. It helps to know something about where somebody's coming from, and it helps to remember that we probably have more in common than we differ on, if we're to the point where we're talking about American politics. So it sounds a little cheesy, but that's how I think about it.
Rachel, we've got a question all the way in the back.
You think that's all the way
Thank you, Rachel. I'm wondering how you could write a book about the drift into the military-industrial complex without an indexed reference to the warnings set forth by Eisenhower in his famous speech about the military-industrial complex.
It's a good question, and it's mostly because that's not much of my time frame. And there's been a lot of prescient warning about what was going to happen as the American national security state grew, and as our responsibilities in the world were seen by most Americans to grow, as our position in the sort of world order, forgive the phrase, changed over time too. And Eisenhower is justly famous for his farewell address and making that claim. I wanted to write about the period specifically between sort of the end of the Vietnam War and 9/11. I think in part because I felt like that's what I needed to understand and explain to be able to make sense of what happened to our politics after 9/11. And so yeah, I think that Eisenhower was right in what he said then, and I think it's important. I think Eugene Jarecki and other people have done a lot toward popularizing that and making people know the good parts of it by heart. I like Eisenhower's Atoms for Peace speech too. But you gotta focus on the argument you're making. Thank you for the question.
I have a question over here on the side.
Hey Rachel, my name is Kingsley. And I'm interested to know how you feel personally about the encroachment of the Republican Party on different rights regarding abortion, and like, do you ever lose heart that what you're talking about, what you're communicating to people, that it's going to get lost or people are not listening? Does it give you pause, and what do you really think about that?
I'm always shocked when people are listening, so I start from when I do my TV show, it's not like this. It's just me and a stage manager guy, and then one other guy that runs the camera that's on the big stick. And other than that, there's nobody else in the room. So the idea that anybody was listening to me at all is always a pleasant surprise. So I don't get bummed out when I feel like people aren't. Low expectations is the key to happiness. But on the reproductive rights trajectory that we've been on in the country for the last couple of years, more than it is electorally unsustainable. And most observers, even in the Republican Party, think that becoming the reason for living of the Republican Party in the states in 2012 doesn't make any sense in electoral terms. So why are they doing it? And that gets you to the really most interesting questions in American politics. I'm fascinated by what the Republican Party is going to be after George W. Bush. They still haven't figured it out. They're not going to be run by John McCain. They're not going to be run by Sarah Palin. They're not, Jim DeMint? I mean, who's the new head of the Republican Party? I mean, it's kind of more Karl Rove than anybody else. It's not Michael Steele. It's not Reince Priebus. What's the party going to stand for? They're not going to survive many elections if what they stand for is blocking access to contraception. And so why are they doing it? They're doing it because the Republican Party is like a beat-up, old, busted, bondoed out Ford Pinto with a broken rail axle. They are in trouble. They got nothing going on. But somebody has figured out how to lash that hulk of what used to be a car to an amazing jet engine, which is the conservative movement, and Fox News Channel, and the conservative media. And the conservative movement has goals that have nothing to do with whether or not Republicans are in office. The conservative movement have goals that are not anti-electoral, but electoral politics. They're not thinking about the next election cycle. They're thinking about the next generation and how right-wing America can become over time. And you can't move the country by incrementally thinking about the next midterm. You move the country by thinking about generational change. And yeah, maybe it's going to cost you all of these governorships that you just won in the Midwest. You know, and maybe it's going to cost you that seat that you're going to win in Pennsylvania. You know, maybe it's going to cost you these short-term things, but in the long run, you're moving the country. And you can only think that way if you are a generationally minded movement. And the conservative movement it's hurting the Republican Party in the short run, but they don't care. Because what they want is a Republican Party that functions as their own vehicle, so that each generation of Republican politicians is so far to the right of the last generation that they would denounce Ronald Reagan by now as a socialist. That's what they've got. If you had anybody running right now on the Sarah Palin and John McCain platform for president, they would be denounced as socialists. They ran on cap and trade. They ran on the bailout. That wasn't that long ago. But Republican politics are sprinting so far to the right that that's obsolete immediately in terms of their ideological turnover. So I think that's freaking weird. and amazing to watch. And anyway, I think it's fun. So thank you for the questions.
Rachel, we got time for a couple more questions. I have one in the back, and we're going to take one last in the front.
Hi, Rachel. One question. When will you run for Congress?
I will not. I have a really good job, and I don't want to run for office. And I have a lot of respect for people who won't run for office, but I have not yet met the jurisdiction that would elect me, and I have respect for that. So I don't want to serve in elected office. But I wish that more people who wanted me to would, frankly, because there's something about the way that you asked that and the way this room responded that makes it pretty clear that we want to, those of us who are here to read this book at least, want there to be more people in public service who think like this. So run. 2016.
We have a question on your right toward the back.
Hi Rachel, my name is Jonathan. I want to ask you about your experience with Richard Engel in Afghanistan and Iraq. How that experience was for you, how did you become, I guess, impacted by the U.S. Army, and how can we as well be impacted by what's going on through National Guard service or whatever it may be? How do you see the whole for the country to be involved with the Army, and also who's hosting your show tonight?
Last one first. Chris Haynes is hosting tonight.
Oh, yeah.
Thank you for the question about traveling with Richard and visiting the war zones. It's an incredible privilege, and there are not very many people in the world. Like, there are 10 people in the world who are Western war correspondents. And I don't think I could do it for a day, let alone a career like he has. We went to college together. We didn't know each other in college, but we realized that we were there at the same time. And I just thought, yeah, okay, so when I graduated from college, I moved to San Francisco and joined ACT UP. And when you graduated from college, you moved to Cairo speaking no Arabic and moved into the slums and made friends with the Muslim Brotherhood because you thought it might be newsworthy someday. And thereby picked up 3 different dialects of Arabic before you moved on to, to everything else he's learned over time. I mean, some people are wired that way. There's 10 of them in the world. One of them is Richard Engel. So it's impressive. I am impressed with myself that he is my colleague. Dude, same organization. But in terms of being able to see the US military at war in Iraq and in Afghanistan, I have to say, I mean, I realize that there's probably a great diversity of opinion in this room about the value of the wars that we've waged since 9/11 and about whether or not you personally would want to serve in the military, whether you want that for your kids. And I respect that diversity of opinion. I have to say that I am very, very impressed by how hardworking, professional, and accomplished the people are who are my generation of veterans. I know a lot of very impressive people in the media, in academia, in activism, in the arts, and I don't know anybody else who's my age or younger who has done anything as hard as the people who have served in Iraq and Afghanistan. I mean, it's cheap to say, you know, I respect the troops and I support the troops. It's a cheap thing to say. Finding ways to show it is a harder thing to do. But there are some easy ground level things to do. If you don't know any Iraq and Afghanistan veterans in your life, and there's only 1% of the population that serves, so don't feel guilty, that's not a weird situation, you can volunteer at a veterans organization. It's just like any other kind of charity work, and you will meet people your own age who have amazing stories to tell. You can join Iraq and Afghanistan Veterans of America as a supporting member. You can go to their events. You can get involved in these issues on political issues. I mean, I don't consider myself an activist anymore. I feel like I used to do that in my life, and now I'm a person who explains things for a living. But if I am an advocate on anything, it is that we should keep our promises to the people who signed up as veterans. So we can do that. And what happens now?
We put you to work.
Oh, very good. All right, so now I sign books. I want to thank you again for turning out. I gotta say, listen, I have a TV show, and I realize that's a really good venue from which to promote a book, and so maybe people who have TV shows get big crowds to turn out. But I wrote a freaking book about the military with a one-word title. And well, it's got a subtitle, they talked me into that. But I realized that this is not candy. And I think that the book is a good read, and I hope that you'll read it and we can talk about it as a country. But it means a lot to me. It makes me feel good about the country that you guys all care about enough about this subject to devote this much effort to learning more about it. And it's very moving, so thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, once again, Rachel Maddow.
Can we get on launch? This is a sellout crowd, right?
Ladies and gentlemen, you are asked to join the line. Bring all your belongings with you. Please take all your belongings with you.
What can I say? You're great. You know, everybody tells you. I'll just agree. Thank you. Thanks. Bye.
Thank you.